So let's reflect a little bit. If we were obviously meeting in person, this would be a chance to kind of think about how far we've come. Now, in many ways, I've been trying to kind of raise that issue, certainly in my question in the last session that we had the morning of my recording this, which was to think back to January, to early January. And we've been through a lot. I think we've covered quite a bit of stuff. And I hope that you feel more equipped to engage with these issues. Now, my experience is that when you engage with this stuff honestly, you end up oftentimes with at least as many questions, if not more questions, than you started out with. So let's sort of think back about where we started. Now, as I mentioned, right, we start with the 4 analytic questions. And again, my contention is that being able to ask these and come up with better answers is an important causal process for all of that stuff down at the right-hand side of the board. Right? All the stuff you want out of life. I'm of the mind that being curious about the world has both professional consequences, it's valuable in the market, and it also has personal consequences, edification. It means you see the world more clearly. So again, in biggest picture terms, I would say this is hopefully something you took away from this semester, is that in this class and in all of your classes, really what we are trying to do is to train you to ask these 4 questions consistently to gain insight about the world, thus hopefully getting you more of this stuff down here. Now, this class specifically, what did we come out with from this? Well, we came out with all of econ in 4 points, right? The 4 points of economics. People choose. Only individuals choose. Individuals choose according to their expected marginal benefit and expected marginal cost. And rules matter. And basically that's what we did all semester. And that's actually what we do in every single economics class from here on out. We took point number 3, right? That individuals choose according to their expected marginal benefit and expected marginal cost to come up with supply and demand. To be able to hopefully now talk about consumer surplus, producer surplus, government, and total surplus. To be able to talk about whether something is likely to increase or decrease well-being. Again, we're looking at specific markets. We also then were able to say something about price. What causes an increase in price? What causes a decrease in price? And really use these points to investigate a wealth of different policies and basically, hopefully, practice using these tools to get answers to the questions that you care about. Now, that's not the only thing. Since that's all of economics in 4 points, we took point 3 out for that, and we also were able to take it out to look at what we should expect from government and when it would make sense to use government. We talked about spillovers. In case you can't tell, by the way, this stuff I think was the bread and butter of this semester. Of course, this falls out of this, the idea about spillovers and why we would care about them. We care about spillovers not because they redistribute wealth, although that might be something that we care about as citizens. As economists, we're agnostic over who deserves stuff, pretty much. And so, I mean, there's an interface between philosophy and economics talking about who deserves things, right? And I think economics is equipped to start talking about that, to engage in those normative discussions. But our main concern with spillovers is that we're going to get either too much or too little of the behavior. And so we also then have talked about the importance, right, of point number 4. Rules matter, right? Different property rights regimes will result in different levels of social coordination. What else did we talk about? We talked about elasticity, what it means, how to use it, how to compare supply and demand schedules with that. Of course, right? Hopefully you now have the idea that margins, what else do we have? We also talked about gains from trade. And hopefully you have some analytic tools for talking about those, right? Why does trade create value? because of different preferences and different endowments, and because specialization creates value, but specialization creates value because of different abilities, learning by doing, and saving on switching time. We also brought in the idea of transaction costs. Now again, you'll see that I'm running out of space on this board. There's no particular rhyme or reason to where I'm putting things. We've got transaction costs, which would keep us from trading with people. What else did we talk about? We have, right, what we should expect, and then we built an analytic framework for talking about when we should use government, given what we understand about the issues for social coordination. Don't forget, big picture, what are we trying to understand? We are trying to understand the extent to which we have social coordination and the extent to which we could improve our social coordination. Right now, with the current crisis, I think we understand that there is probably less social coordination in many ways than many of us would like. I don't really like cleaning my apartment. Normally, I hire somebody to clean my apartment. However, over the last 30 days, that has not been a feasible option, and so I have been reduced to cleaning my own apartment. In other words, transaction costs have been fairly high, and we've not been able to take advantage of as much of the gains from trade as extensively. What else have we talked about? We talked about how to deal with spillovers, gains from trade. I think that's most of it, really. Maybe you can come up with some things that I've missed, right? Now, we've talked about some cases where markets, right? We've oftentimes big picture, what people walk away from this is hopefully some we also did talk about comparative advantage. Comparative advantage, in my view, is not really important for why there's gains to be had from specialization in trade, but is actually far more important for the normative moral claims that everybody has something to contribute. I had another thought here, but I've completely forgot. Oh, yeah. Basically, we've talked about, right, B versus G and A. Basically, this is typically people tend to feel, oftentimes, they tend to fall into one of two categories. They're either in favor of markets or in favor of government. Talk to most people, they tend to come down on those two fronts. Economists tend to be perceived as coming down on the side of markets, most of them, with some level of suspicion for government. Of course, we have an analytic framework for thinking about why we would be reluctant to maybe use G. Again, what we would expect from government. We would expect short-termism. We would expect, right, all of those things. But again, what I would say is what we really care about, and economists don't necessarily explain this very well. We care about social coordination and maximizing value. And in order to do that, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to solve, whether we're using markets or whether we're using government, we're going to have to solve the information and the incentive problems. People are going to have to know the right thing to do, and they're going to have an incentive to act on that. And that's a very difficult thing. Now, most of the semester, we spent a lot of time talking about how this works in the realm of markets. But of course, markets don't work without functioning rules. And in any given moment, any individual doesn't have an incentive to follow the rules, right? We all have an incentive to cheat. And so what we need in order for markets to work well is we may not need government, but we definitely need some form of governance, right? In many ways, that's what you guys hire me to do, is if you're going to get from where you were at the start of the semester to here, on any given Friday night or weekend or Tuesday night, you're going to have an incentive to hang out with friends, to clean your house, to do a variety of things. In any given instance, it's not going to be incentive compatible for you to actually focus in on things. This is why most learning does not happen outside of the classroom. Now, that doesn't mean that all learning happens inside the classroom, but basically, in effect, my view of the main role that you are paying me for is to provide a governance mechanism, to provide an incentive structure for you to voluntarily get the most out of this experience that you can. Now let's be clear. This is not saying that we want more selfish behavior. Let me find let's see here. Find some notes. Make sure that I'm covering the main points that I wanted to talk about. Again, hopefully what you leave this class with is not a bunch of answers, but a new way of looking at the world, what we call the economic way of thinking. Studying how things fit together. This is not detailed knowledge of particulars. We can apply it to particulars, and I'm hoping you all have seen over the course of the term how these pieces fit together. Now, along the way, we have used the self-interest model. The idea that that's implicit in our point number 3, right? Individuals choose according to their expected marginal benefit and expected marginal cost. This is a biased and limited view of human nature, but let's be clear, this is not the same thing as saying that everybody is selfish. Now, the danger of this is that we think that it explains all behavior or should explain all behavior. One of my concerns with you all leaving this semester is that one of the things from research is that people who study economics tend to be more selfish. Of course, for me as a scientist, right, one of my questions would be, which direction is causality lying? Are people who are more selfish going into and studying economics? If that's true, I think we as a discipline have done a poor job. On the other hand, if people walk in basically as like the general public and walk out of economics classes feeling like selfishness is a good thing, then we've also done a terrible job. It turns out, hopefully we all understand, that personal relations, whether family or mosque or church or synagogue, whatever your religious, right, whatever temple, whatever religious group you belong to, friends, that in that intimate order, so we kind of have, what we have talked about this semester is very powerful and useful when we're talking about the extended order. The millions and billions of people who are necessary for us to get things like toilet paper or hand sanitizer, right? Our model works very well at explaining that stuff. But our self-interest model does less well in what we would call the intimate order. Friends, family, loved ones, right? But it should do less well. Now, the economic reasoning makes sense in that big picture, in the intimate order. But again, I think that that's where, when I'm trying to understand the intimate order, or I'm trying to understand individuals' decision making, I go back to this. When, on the other hand, I'm trying to understand how millions and billions of people's choices interact to produce societal outcomes, that is typically where I go. I hope that you're left from this term understanding that explaining how thousands, if not millions, if not billions of people who have very limited knowledge about each other's circumstances, about each other's needs or elasticities, explaining how those millions and billions of people can come together to cooperate to reach mutual goals. I hope you've taken away from this semester that is a valuable and important endeavor. I particularly think that in light of current events and recent events, I'm hoping that you're walking away feeling like these tools are even more important and more relevant. Right? So much of the time with people who are born and raised in wealthy countries, there's sort of the sense of, why do I care? Now think back to when we focused in on breakfast, right? And that process of millions and billions of people coordinating to get you your breakfast. And my contention was that was the most magical thing that we as a species have come up with outside of the movies. I hope that you both share some of that appreciation, right? This why do I care question. And also understand that it's an important study and that you are somewhat equipped for it. right? So if we think about that system, we've talked about prices and the role that they play in communicating information. Remember, whenever we're dealing with something, we have to overcome both the information and the incentive problem. And prices are an important part of that. Prices communicate and provide incentives to cooperate for millions and billions of people. Again, one of the things that I hope you walk away with is an understanding of why when you go to the store and you see something that you feel is ridiculously priced, your reaction shouldn't be, oh, I'm really upset, but rather, my reaction as an economist is to say, great, I am receiving information that I should cooperate with the other people who want this. I should leave it on the shelf. And I'm given incentives to act on that information. So we've got prices. What else? Oh, we've also talked about profit, right? So profit, economic profit, what it is, and that's also part of our information and incentive communication mechanism. It provides people who organize the world more effectively to generate more value with a reward for doing so and communication that they're doing a good thing. And people who make negative economic profit, it provides them with the information that they're destroying value and the incentive to act on it. They don't have to care about social well-being. They don't have to have any of the tools that we've talked about so far this semester, and yet they are going to behave as though they understand these tools. We also have talked about the importance of property rights, the rules governing access to and control over resources. In effect, and this, by the way, is where I would bring in governance. These are the rules. And if we have solid property rights with a system of flexible prices, along with a system where people get to keep positive economic profit and are forced to deal with negative economic profit, this is, in markets, of course, the main way in which we overcome both the information and incentive problems. And markets do a very good job of this. We've also incorporated the idea of need and how to talk about that, the fact that really substitutes exist for everything. And so need in the way we are experienced in using it is somewhat nonsensical. It doesn't actually tell us much. And the way that we've actually reinvigorated this idea was with the idea about elasticity. So when somebody tells me they really need something, what I hear, and the way I translate it is, they have a very price inelastic demand. Of course, then that raises the compared to what question. Other things that we've talked about, hopefully you understand what cost is. Opportunity costs are the costs that matter. And cost versus expense, these are different. We've also talked about, and hopefully you have appreciated and understood, that we make decisions on the margin, that margins matter. Hopefully you understand gains from trade and comparative advantage. The idea, hopefully you also understand the economics of information, right? Speculators, arbitrageurs, how markets can provide this information, whether through formal futures markets or through specialized providers. Hopefully you've also understood and grasped some of the ideas about competition, how competition is part of a discovery process, and how competitors and incumbent firms really like restrictions on entry and restrictions on competition. And that the arguments for restricting competition oftentimes sound quite a bit like the arguments in favor of competition. We've also talked, as I mentioned, about what happens if markets aren't great at conveying good information and good incentives, in which case we were talking about spillovers. And we've talked about how alternative coordination mechanisms work, like government or first come, first served, or etc. But after understanding all of this, this doesn't mean that, I really hope you don't leave this class saying greed is good. This is not saying that greed is good. There's philosophic reasons why greed is very problematic, but why our addiction to more might be something you want to reconsider. It certainly is in my personal life, right? I've spent the last 30 days spending time with and focusing on appreciating what I have. And I think there's a lot of value in that. But this is saying that if people are focused on more, that we can harness that instinct for social benefit. And so it's saying that taking people where they're at, this system can make people who otherwise might be socially destructive productive. Okay, so markets are very good at getting us where we want to go, but they really don't tell us much about where we want to go. They can tell us about trade-offs, costs, incentives, but they can't tell us about the value of those trade-offs and costs. They can give us a framework for weighing different things, but they aren't necessarily going to give us those answers. And so, again, I would say that this is not to devalue or to, in no way does the economic framework, in my view, devalue the role of religion or philosophy or, right? Those sorts of things to figure out, again, if you think back to the beginning of the term, we spent some time talking about all of that stuff that you want down at the right-hand side of the board. But really, that's up to you as individuals. And economics and analytics can tell us something about how to get from here to here. And I think it does actually tell us a fair bit about what might be good from the point of view of society. But we don't, it is not to say that we reject sort of morality or philosophy. It's saying the question is, how do we figure out what is moral in the extended order? I would argue that most philosophy has focused on the intimate order, and for good reason, because for most of human history, up until about 200 years ago, we really function almost entirely in the realm of the intimate order. It's really been only in the last couple hundred years that we've managed to coordinate millions and billions of people. And so there's a different morality there. It's not saying that morality doesn't matter in that arena. It's saying that there's actually what is moral in the intimate order is oftentimes immoral in the extended order, because many efforts to improve the world have serious problems, because there's unintended consequences. And in the extended order, we can't rely on intentions. They're not enough, right? We talked about minimum wages. Maybe those are put in place to help poor people, but do they? I doubt it. Subsidies, right? Subsidies, we want more of something, but do we really? Rent controls, we want to keep poor people from being priced out of the housing market. That's a laudable intention. But do rent controls actually do that? Not so sure, right? Endangered Species Act. I don't know that we dealt with that very much, but think about what the Endangered Species Act has done. It turns out that I would argue that the Endangered Species Act has made it even more likely that endangered species will be harmed. Basically, the idea would be, think about from an individual point of view, there is a benefit of having biodiversity, but of course, if I have land and I have a spotted owl on my land, I only get part of the benefit. Whereas when the federal government comes in and says, look, if you have endangered species on your land, you can no longer engage in logging, you can no longer develop the land. What happens? I bear all of the costs and get only part of the benefit from biodiversity. And so we would expect an under-provision of habitat for endangered species. That drops straight out of it. So it's a nice case of a spillover. And so the Endangered Species Act, in effect, has provided incentives to people to what is called shoot, shovel, and shut up. If you find a spotted owl on your property, get rid of it. Shoot it, shovel, and shut up. Of course, even if you aren't that extreme, it definitely would encourage people to destroy habitat in advance of the endangered species showing up. All right, we've talked some here this term about environmental quality, and that environmental quality is a normal good. It's an inferior good up until a certain point, and a normal good after that. Now, hopefully you walk away from this semester feeling like you have some insight into how to engage with reality, how to apply some analytic tools to figure out what is actually real. and that at least in the economic domain, reality is not optional, right? Minimum wages yield either fewer jobs or fewer hours for the poor. Subsidies yield wasteful production and consumption. We oftentimes ration based on some other characteristic. Rent controls, we end up with fewer lower-priced apartments, and we oftentimes end up with wasteful non-price competition. Endangered species, we have less habitat. Environmental quality, we oftentimes get more pollution as a result of the EPA. So again, I hope you're walking away from this semester understanding these pieces and this issue here, that social coordination requires us to overcome both the information and incentive problems. So information and incentives are important, and we have to think through how those are altered by changing the rules, or in our language, changing our property rights. But none of this is a statement that we need more self-interested behavior. That is not what I want you to walk away from this semester with. I would argue that what we want to do is maximize social coordination, but that understanding social coordination is an immensely important task. We've seen how it can break down. Understanding the real and predictable consequences of actions and of policies is an immensely important task. And so economics contains a set of tools that help illuminate these issues, in my view, in many ways better than most anything else I found, which is why I chose to study and devote my life to communicating these ideas to folks. But hopefully this provides us with a set of tools to not answer the questions that I want answered, right? That's going to be the end of this with the final exam. I'm going to set you some examples, some questions for you to apply these tools to. But I hope that you're leaving this semester not with a set of answers, but a set of analytic tools to address and answer the questions, or come up with better answers to the questions that you find compelling. That's my hope. My hope is that I know it's been painful along the way, but many things that are valuable are painful. And I really encourage you to think back to the beginning of January. My hope is that you feel like this has been an edifying process, even if it has been at times a difficult one. And hopefully you share my goal of being a curious human being, to appreciate the magic and the mundane around us, and to hopefully have a better grasp of social coordination or the lack thereof. Thank you for a good semester. If you haven't already, please fill out the teaching evaluations. Give me some feedback. Give the administration some feedback about the transition from on-site to online. Maybe give some feedback to faculty in the qualitative section about what has worked in your classes that have gone online, what hasn't worked in those classes, suggestions for improvements, right? That's your opportunity to give people some information. It may not fully solve the incentive problem, because there is, of course, the question, do faculty and does the administration have an incentive to act on that information? But at least you have carried out your job in providing the information. So thank you all for a semester, right? I think it's been a different semester than we expected when we started. I'm really glad we had the first couple months to get to know each other. I'm really glad we had the first couple months to lay the framework for taking this online. And I appreciate you putting up with me and my attempts to figure out how to do this more effectively. Again, if you have constructive suggestions, if you have destructive suggestions, please feel free to put them into the evaluation comments, or if you feel comfortable enough, feel free to email me directly, and I'll be happy to engage on that. So thank you all. I look forward to seeing some of you in future classes, and others of you simply around town and on campus. Don't be a stranger, and feel free to reach out if there are questions I can help with, or if there are simply things that victories and achievements and other things that you would like to share. So with that, I will leave you to looking back over the big picture, everything we covered. Again, in my view, it all comes out of this, and then all of economics in 4 points. And that has expanded to a lot of tools. I hope you're left feeling that you are more equipped to answer the questions that you care about and that you feel that you have made significant progress down here to the right-hand side of the board. So I wish you well. Don't be a stranger. Feel free to reach out, and I wish you the best.